Welcome back for part 2 with Lucky Luckadoo at the Pedigree Ranch.
Welcome to At the Forefront, where we explore the groundbreaking innovations and developments shaping the future of aging. We're hitting the road to showcase how older adults are embracing change, staying active, and thriving in their golden years. Here's your host, CEO of Forefront Living, Tim Mallett.
Lucky, when we were preparing for this episode, we had an interesting discussion about, I think, something very ironic. When you joined the Army, it had been 8 decades since the Civil War. As we sit here today, it's been 8 decades since World War II. Talk about the irony in that and perspective regarding that.
Well, Tim, it was rather startling for me to look back on my lifespan of over 100 years and realize that America has been at war my entire lifetime and still is. And I grew up on the side of Missionary Ridge in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which during the Civil War was a famous battle of 1864, the Battle of Missionary Ridge. And I was overwhelmed with the repercussions and the aftermath of the Civil War in this country, and what impact it had on our lives and on the lives of those who I would see as I looked out of my elementary school window at this huge memorial park to the Civil War, where there were larger than life-sized statues, cannonballs and cannons and huge plaques that describe that battle. And the elements or the weather in Chattanooga was rainy, it was foggy, and cloudy, and I could visualize these soldiers coming up the side of the ridge and taking over the Confederate forces that had the highest advantage, but they lost it because of their inadequate command. But from that came World War II, World War I, and then World War II, when I was growing up and just graduated from high school, and Pearl Harbor occurred. Then we had the Cold Wars, then we had the Gulf Wars and Korea and Vietnam, and we're still at war today. And that's a sad commentary on our society, that we cannot resolve our differences without resorting to military conflict.
Having been surrounded by that history, having learned those lessons, how did they impact you when you embarked and flew one of these planes? How did those lessons impact what you were doing during the Second World War?
Well, they certainly spurred me to respond. During high school, I've been in a junior ROTC and commanded a battalion and aspired to go to West Point and make the military my career. But other things intervened, and of course, with Pearl Harbor, I cannot tell you what it was like to witness and experience the unity that occurred when we were attacked at Pearl Harbor, the country prior to Pearl Harbor had been totally divided and opposed to entering a war in Europe. And Roosevelt could not commit our troops, committed to funds and support and other material things, but he couldn't commit troops because the public wouldn't permit it. But with Pearl Harbor, the country came together like it has never been before or since and outproduced the world. We didn't know we could produce all of the war material for ourselves as well as our allies. And the women came out of the homes, and it was the emancipation, the beginning of emancipation of women in America. World War II was. And yet we have never, and this is one of the things that I'm spending my remaining years in doing, is getting Congress to recognize that all of those people who weren't in uniform, the civilians, from grandchildren to grandparents, who supported us so magnificently and outproduced the world, have never been thanked. We've never had a day set aside when we say, for goodness sake, you made such significant contributions to our war effort, we would never have prevailed if it hadn't been for you. And yet we've never acknowledged that. And why?
But you're working on
I'm working on getting Congress, if you can get Congress to agree to anything, to
Now's
set
your chance.
aside a day for Home Front Heroes Day, May the 9th. And we've observed that locally at PVN for 5 years now. And hopefully it'll be a grassroots activity that will capture the country and force the Congress to recognize home front heroes. We got a day for everything else. We ought to have one for the home front heroes.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, Lucky. Sitting here talking to you, there's a direct connection to those times. I can see it in your eyes. I can see that it's still relevant. I can see that those experiences are fresh. We are entering a time when there are very few people who witnessed those events like you have, very fewer yet that participated as directly as you did. You participated in the creation of a docuseries of Masters of the Air. We have a lot of films related to the Second World War. In fact, you were mentioned, I believe, by name on Stephen Colbert's show. Can you tell us about that real quickly?
Well, one of the actors, the British actors that portrayed characters in the docuseries was being interviewed by Colbert, and he said, well, he had met me, and I was actually one of the members of the group, and Colbert just broke up. He said, you mean his name is really Luckadoo?
Well, and I also hear, at least from one of my daughters, that Austin Butler mentioned your name as well on one of the morning programs. So you are forever embedded, at least in all the young ladies' minds, after he mentioned your name.
Well, that was another reason why, when I realized that these things that happened to the 100th that didn't happen to any other group were being ignored, that I wrote the book and named it Damn Lucky. Because if you survive, and certainly as I did, from the original group, 25 missions, you had to have a guardian angel on each shoulder. And you were not just lucky, but you were damn lucky to have survived.
So how can we, as the next generations, I'll add an S, keep what you fought for relevant? How can we keep those stories and those experiences relevant for future generations?
Well, of course, the docuseries and other movies like 12 O'Clock High and other efforts, and the demonstration exhibit of the warbirds that we used and how we did it, and people like Mike who are perpetuating the legends and the stories will keep it alive. And I recall at one point, before I lost my dear wife, Bobby, I said, honey, I'm sick to death of hearing my story. I've told it so many different ways and to so many different groups, all the way from school children up to Air Force Academy cadets, that I'm weary. I'm exhausted. I'm going to hang it up. I'm quitting. I'm retiring. I'm not going to do it anymore. And she said, you can't. You owe it to successive generations to remind them and tell them of the obligations that they have to our generation for doing what we did when we did it and how we did it. And as long as you can, you've got to keep it up. So that's what I'm still doing after 30 years.
What do you think of the accuracy of this model?
It's superb. You look at the landing gear and the turrets, the engines, everything about it is really so meticulously done. And for it to actually fly as it did, as a radio-controlled model, I mean, it takes off, they pull up the gear, and they fly it around and show what it can do aerodynamically, and land it in one piece is really outstanding. The thousands of hours that go into perfecting that model.
So you've seen other examples, haven't you, of
yes.
this plane?
Yes.
And how does this one compare?
Well, it's like the other examples. They're very good too. I have one that's on display at the Frontiers of Flight Museum down at Love Field. That's in a glass case that was battle damaged, and it shows the patches and the results of going out on a mission, and the guns hanging out the windows, and it is just another similar example to this, but to see these actually flying around is almost as good as seeing the full-scale models. And I got to fly one of the real ones, the few that are still flyable.
And when was that?
That was 12 years ago in Savannah, Georgia. I wanted to prove that I was 92 at the time, that an old duck could still fly that thing.
And
I got the opportunity to do it.
how many of the original ones are left, Lucky? They're still flying.
Well, flyable, there are only about a half a dozen. There were 12, but we've lost some, and they grounded others, and they're terribly expensive to function, to operate. I mean, you just figure the fuel that it takes to take 4 engines off and fly it around the pattern and land it, you're talking thousands of dollars. They weren't built for efficiency. They were built for defense, and they really were gas guzzlers. I had a guy, a dentist over in Fort Worth, who owned one. And he was up at McKinney when I went up to an air show. And he had buckets under he was parked on the ramp. He had buckets under each engine to catch the oil dripping out.
Wow.
And he said, Lucky, I'll let you fly if you'll go back to Fort Worth with me if you'll buy the gas. And I said, thanks, Doc, but I know what it will cost me.
You and I actually have a shared experience. We went out to McKinney, and B-17 was there, and you were offered a ride in one, and one had just crashed before that. And I vividly remember you telling the crew that you thanked them for their offer, and you said you were hoping to turn 100 and you didn't want to put anything at risk, and you volunteered me for the ride. And I think it ranks as one of the top 10 experiences in my life. But something happened to that plane. Do you want to tell our viewers what happened?
Well, unfortunately, it was in an air show here in Dallas. And the show, there was a miscommunication, and they were down low altitude, and the very airplane that I flew was the one that unfortunately was impacted by a P-63 that winged up and blanked out the airplane, didn't know it was there, and they collided, and all 6 airmen on both were killed.
And you knew the crew, or at least some of the crew on the
B-17.
B-17.
Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't know the pilot of the P-63, but that was a red flag for the Congress, and so they grounded them all and refused to let other people pay and go up and support the cost of operating one.
Well, today,
so it was,
I'll always remember. So,
well, it's a rare experience, but unfortunately, it doesn't replicate what we endured. The bitter cold at high altitude and formation, 50 and 60 degrees below zero for hours on end, and it doesn't replicate getting shot at.
no. I had a very peaceful flight over McKinney. Well,
looking down the guns, the barrels of German aircraft is not a happy experience, and they can't replicate that.
and I hope we don't have to see that again.
And I told Tom Hanks that, and I also told him that this replacement of the co-pilots was something that didn't happen to the other group, and that should be documented.
So a trivia question for you. Masters of the Air, there wasn't going to be a 10th episode, is that correct? And did you have a hand in making that happen?
I think I probably did, because when they flew me to Hollywood for the premiere, the first episode, Tom Hanks came up to me and he said, "Lucky, what did we get wrong?" And I said, "Well, Tom, with all due respect, I'm going to wait until I've seen all 9 episodes before I render an opinion. I've only seen one." But I said I'm interested in how and if you even mentioned those things that happened to the 100th that I told your writers about 10 years ago that have never been picked up by any historian, and nobody knows why. And he said, oh, so I knew the answer. But at the end, well, the series is about personalities. They tried to replicate the persona of these 5 guys that they selected. And they did a good job of that. That's very well done. But Tom did a 10th episode after the series was released, and he calls it The Bloody 100th. And that really, he took excerpts from the interviews that they made from those of us who were there, that they did during the course of the production, which was 11 years in production. And he demonstrated more of what the group accomplished in the 2 years we were in combat. Our losses, our bombing accuracy, and all of those things, instead of the personalities of the people that they showed in the docuseries. But they had to sell it to the public, and they wanted to make it more. They plastered mustaches on all of these guys, and none of them had mustaches. And I didn't even recognize them because they didn't look like that. And they didn't try. They didn't try to make them up like to appear like they were in real life. They simply attached. I had to watch it 3 times before I knew who they were talking about.
It's lucky if there's something, or if there's a message, or there's one particular way that you want to be remembered, or what you want to be noted for. What would that be?
I hope is learn, because war is foolish, war is stupid. We don't learn anything from war, is that we will resort and we will raise and produce statesmen who will rely upon negotiations and diplomacy instead of resorting to armed conflict, because it doesn't prove a thing, and we don't learn a thing from it. We never have, and we never will.
Powerful words. Thank you for joining us at the forefront. 2 more times, and I think just like Saturday Night Live, you get a jacket. So in our next visit, hopefully we'll be able to talk about Homefront Heroes Day becoming a national holiday. We all have the power and the ability to impact change and to make things happen. And with you as our inspiration, we'll continue to carry that on. So thank you, Lucky, for joining us at the forefront.
Thank you for having me.